they change it.
They do. All right. So, welcome again, everybody. Welcome to our short take webinar on you were elected to leadership, now what? And so, just kind of discussing and reviewing and understanding the roles and responsibilities of your chair, vice chair, and board members. And so, especially maybe some of you have been on your board for a long time. And so, you're just kind of checking in to see what other districts are doing on other boards. And maybe some of you are new to the role and you're just like, I don't really know what I just stepped into, but now I'm chair and now I don't know what I'm in for. So hopefully we can discuss this. Feel free to put any questions in the chat. You can always unmute and ask as well. This is typically a 25 to 30-minute webinar, but we have 3 panelists, and so we may go up to 45 minutes or so. But feel free to ask as many questions as you would like. So just really quickly, we have Jody Bruns on. She is our NDSU Extension Leadership and Civic Engagement Specialist. And then we have Mike Schaefer from Eddy County. He's the chairman there. And then Steve Gilgee, and he's our Rolette County Vice Chair. And so I think very briefly, I'll just go through if you each just want to hop on and just say hi really quickly, your name and maybe how long you've been in your role, and then we can kind of just keep moving with the agenda. So we'll start with Jody.
Morning. I've been with Extension in this role for about 10 years, and I'm located in Oaks, southeast corner of the state.
And Mike.
Yeah, I'm Mike Schaefer from New Rockford, Eddy County. I've been on the SCD board for about 5 years, was vice chair for probably a year before becoming chairman for about 2 years.
And Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Gilgee. Been Rolette County Supervisor for 8 or 9 years, something like that. And I'm also on the state board, the Area 3 Director with Mike, who is
Yes.
now our Area 1 Director. So small world.
All right, thank you so much. We'll start with Jody. So Jody is one of our specialists, and she's just going to kind of summarize what some of those roles and duties are, and then we will go into Mike and Steve to give some more personal touch on some of those things.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. So when Lady and I talked about just covering like the difference between governance and management and some of the roles of board members, I thought about an example someone had shared with me. I work with a number of boards. It seems like board training and governance seems to be a pretty popular topic. And you think about in your own community how many boards there are, even nonprofit and elected. I mean, every community, people wear a lot of hats. There are a lot of positions to fill. And I have served on many boards, and not in one case have I ever been officially given a position description or trained officially. And so I think it's a really important topic. And again, I was going to share with you an example. Someone came to me and they were frustrated, and it was about a school board member. And the chairperson, the chairman of the school board, often walked through the school during the school day just to keep an eye on things and would poke his head into the classrooms. And I thought that's a prime example of management versus governance. And so I found a definition that I keep with my training materials. I just want to share this with you. So governance sets the what and why, like the vision, strategy, kind of big picture, right, for the whole organization. While management, so I think about a school board member is governance, or your SCD board, your supervisors are governance, okay? We're the day-to-day management, right? The daily operations, that indeed is management. Implementing plans, resource allocation, kind of checking off, are we achieving the goals that we have for the year, things like that. So governance is about authority, direction, and accountability, focusing on long-term organizational health and stakeholders, whereas management, or the paid employees, is about execution and control and delivering results within the framework set by the governance. So again, governance is focusing on that big picture. So board members are to be thinking about, strategic goals for the long term, compliance, kind of risk management kinds of things, stakeholder interests. So people who utilize your services. So it's like your board of directors, governing bodies, so your supervisors, and then your management or day-to-day operations. So um, just some things to think about. I think it's great if supervisors or board members stop in the office or just to stop in and, hey, how's it going today? Check in with staff, take a genuine interest in what's happening. I think it's important to have an understanding of the day-to-day activities. But anything beyond that is overreach and micromanagement. That is up to the paid employees, the paid management to do those kinds of things. So again, it never hurts to take an interest um, and then hear listen to concerns and be aware of those roles. So I'm timing myself. I don't want to go over, but if you have a couple questions before my time is up, I'm happy to field those. So I also get asked oftentimes, what do we do about a 3 or 4 hour meeting? Is that normal? And in no case is that ever normal. And I think to talk about the roles of your chairperson, they really set the tone for the organization. And my first question is always, do you have an agenda for your meetings? And how is the agenda created? And are you following Robert's Rules of Order? Are you sticking to your agenda? And I have been to hundreds of meetings where we're off the rails on some tangent. And that's how you get 3 and 4 hour meetings. If you truly stick to the agenda and then you have the social time before or after that meeting, I think that's completely acceptable. But I also hear from an awful lot of people that's why they won't serve on boards because of the 3 and 4 hour meetings and the agenda that's ignored and not followed. And so it is really important that an agenda is set and you follow that. And much of the business of meetings can be handled of, by committees. It can be handled outside of the actual meeting. So keep those in mind. Keep those ideas in mind. And so we might have to copy and paste the resource again, but I'm following a resource actually from from a 4-H officer's handbook, and it's solid general information. And so I'll just cover a couple of these things. So the responsibilities of officers. So president, preside over all regular meetings, call those meetings to order, appoints committees, okay? Serves as your representative or contact person, helps plan the agenda, works with the leaders and other members to plan a yearly club or group programs. So if you have SCD programs happening, typically leads those things. And I think it's the chairperson also or president sets the tone for the organization. Okay. And I would think in regards to ethics and board responsibility and attitude, that really comes from the top. And know that that you, the president or the chairperson, really sets the tone for the whole organization. So making sure that your meetings begin on time, end on time, quorum is recognized, being ethically, modeling behavior that you want your organization to use and see. Some things regarding the vice president is a person who assists the president and is prepared to assume the president's duties if they should not be able to fulfill those responsibilities. Serves on the executive committee, serve as a chairperson for the program. So committee chairperson, etc. And so, different groups have various roles, but essentially these are pretty general as a general guideline. And so you can access these with that link that's in the chat. And if you join later, we can get that to you as well. So um, I think I'll just we're about out of time. So a couple things I would just advise is know your mission. Sometimes organizations, in my experience, the meetings that I've attended, sometimes we forget what our roles are. Truly, what is your role? What is your soil conservation district truly supposed to be doing? Okay. And it never hurts to set some goals, have some kind of strategic plan. I know that that is talked about in the academy. So what is the direction for your year? What does that look like? What are some things you can achieve? And then I also think it's important to just remember the term followership and that there is indeed only one chairperson. And so the board needs to be good followers. And I know that sounds a little ridiculous. We never tell anyone to be good followers, but there's only one chairperson. And so your board members need to support your chairperson. Okay. And so how can you do that? Maybe you need to ask your chairperson, how can we support you? How can we support the mission of this organization? Okay. If you're not sure if the mission of your mission or what your role is, maybe you need to discuss some position descriptions. What does that look like? What are your term limits? What are the expectations? I think oftentimes conflict in organizations stems from just not having clear expectations and what everyone should be doing, what everyone's role is. Okay. And so on my sheet, I see I have one discussion question, Lindy, and I don't know if do you want this for the end or do you want me to ask this now and just let it simmer?
Yeah, let's go ahead. So I was asking Jody, do you have, because she's witnessed and been part of a lot of situations with a lot of boards. And so I just asked her, do you have any personal tips and best practices from boards that you've seen and worked with that has created an effective board?
So I wrote two things here. Conflict is not bad, and over communication is simply good communication. And so what I mean by that is one conflict, I think, if boards are functioning at their highest level and there is a level of trust and respect and professionalism, conflict is okay. And sometimes we forget that disagreements is okay. If we're civil and we respect each other and have a level of trust, we should be able to discuss anything, even if we don't agree. Okay. I think that's number one. And two, over communication is just communication. And I can't say that enough. Understanding what everyone's role and mission is. And you can't communicate enough with your constituents and people who live in your county or your district. Um, I feel like I've been working for Extension for a very long time. Inevitably, once a week, I probably hear, I didn't know Extension did that. And I know that people feel the same way about soil conservation districts, not truly knowing the mission of your organization. And so those would be two takeaways. Know your mission, know that conflict isn't bad, and communicate.
Awesome. Thanks, Jody. Thanks for that little segue into our experiences with Mike and Steve. So I'm going to pass this on to Mike, and feel free if you have any questions, stick those in the chat. I did ask in the chat as well for those of you that are attending, what is something that has helped your board run smoothly? I know you guys have been to a lot of meetings. So what is one thing that you're like, oh, we do this really well and it's really helped our board, stay under that 3 hours or be effective and have good communication, or maybe you're just agreeing that conflict is okay and it's uncomfortable, but it is okay. And it's always good to get other people's opinions. If everybody thought the same way, we wouldn't necessarily get anywhere. So there's a reason we have a board of people. So Mike, he's our Eddy County chair, and he's a part of a lot of other boards too. So he's got a lot of good experience. And I'll just kind of let you take the lead with what you want to share. And then one of the questions I had for him was, what has helped support you in being an effective chairman?
Okay, thanks, Lindy. Well, definitely, as far as keeping a meeting on track and on time, what I like to do personally is, visit with our manager. His name is also Mike, so it might sound a little tricky, but I like to visit with him the week before, build an agenda, and then just try to stick with it. Now, that's not to say that things don't come up that we address that aren't on the agenda, but I kind of take those with, okay, we can get through that quickly here, or no, we need to talk about that next time. Um, and then stick to the agenda. The guys will definitely get off topic, whether it's weather or fishing or whatever it is, and then just kind of keep them dialed back in and get through the meeting. So I am very goal orientated when I get there. I want to get the meeting done and get everybody out the door if they need to be. So um, it's not uncommon for the guys to be like, "Hey, thanks, that was really quick," and they appreciate it. So yeah.
Yeah, and I would say too, like sometimes, like if I've planned something to come to a meeting or whatever, sometimes he'll reach out to me and be like, we need to have a short meeting today. Can we have you next month? And that is totally fine. Like you don't have to, if you have people that are coming and doing something special at your meeting, to have them come at a time where you're not in such a hurry, because there are times of the year that you do want to just kind of get things. You guys have other things to tend to. Um, One of the things that I wanted to ask, because it's always good to humble yourself a little bit, and it's okay when mistakes happen, because especially when you're leading a group, sometimes it is uncomfortable and it's hard to be like, oh no, I can't believe I just did that. So one of the things we like to say is if you're gonna fail, fail forward. And so as the chairman, what are some learning curves or lessons that you've learned maybe the hard way, and that it's okay to share with other leaders, that it's okay to make a mistake every now and then?
Definitely, and maybe not the first thing that comes to mind maybe isn't exactly a mistake, but I started on that board as just a supervisor. It was very normal. I didn't know a lot about what they did, just kind of learning as you go. Was quickly made vice chair, which didn't change my role a lot. But then the chairman resigned and I got tossed into that. And then shortly after that, we had a major employee change. And that's when I realized that I did not have the skills I needed to be in this position. And so there was a lot of failing. And I wouldn't call them normal on day to day, but definitely in that role that I was suddenly in, trying to run an organization that I didn't have enough knowledge of to do so properly. So there was a lot of reaching out to people and going back and redoing things and it was just a big learning curve and we got through it and things are getting better now. So um and not everything goes as planned, that's for sure.
Yeah. And so with that, I have a couple, maybe I can tie two questions together, because you did mention, let's say we were talking about that you're kind of, it takes a little bit to get used to your role, and especially when you're stepping into something new, and it just, you know, a lot of times you have one board meeting a month, sometimes you might skip a month, and so you don't even necessarily communicate all the time. But I know Mike also kind of followed Jody's suggestion about like just keeping um, in tune with what is going on, and that helps with the meetings and keeping them going. So knowing already what is going on day to day really helps, I think, run your meeting effectively. So you know what your manager or your employees are talking about. Um, so the two questions that I have quickly before we go to Steve is, as a chairman, what advice would you give to someone just stepping into the role? And then with the thought of that it takes time to get used to your role, um, I had the question one time of how often would you recommend rotating positions of your chairman, vice chair? And so do you have any insight for those that may be asking that question?
Well, definitely when you step into the chair, what can help a lot is, keeping good communication with that employee that's next. You kind of like for our SCD, we just have the one employee right now, And, it goes right back to when we had an employee that had been there for a long time and knew their role. It was very easy to not be involved because you knew everything was being taken care of. And that hurt in the long run of, having to work in a new employee. So even if things are going really smooth and everything's, just make sure you're in good communication and you have an idea what's going on when, and so that way, when that situation changes, you can at least, you know, feel like you have somewhat of an idea of where you are. It definitely had to, even though you really shouldn't, when we hired a new employee, I had to micromanage that because there was no one else to, I mean, it was questions like, where do we buy our printer ink, and definitely things that I would call micromanaging, but just first time questions, that the new employee had who had zero knowledge of their new position, so they just really wanted to ask a lot of questions. The the SCD does a fantastic job with resources and people for them to reach out to, and eventually that became very normal for our new employee and really helpful. What was the other question?
How often would you recommend rotating positions?
I think every other time there would be nothing wrong with that. I really do, even if that's just flip-flopping chair and vice chair. A lot of times your leadership roles that aren't necessarily things that regular supervisors are really looking to do. But even if everything is going well and everybody plans on staying, I think every other time would be great.
Thanks. And obviously, this, every district is different and every board is unique, and what works for them may be something different from another board. So what we're stating and a lot of things that we're talking about are just suggestions and guidelines of what has worked for a lot of people and being effective. And but maybe there's things on a certain board that has worked really well for you. Let's move over to Steve. So he's our vice chairman. And so um, when I found out he was the vice chairman, I was like, let's talk about that role because it is kind of like that role that's sometimes it's in limbo land. Like you're a board member, not a board member, but you're not the chairman. So as a vice chairman, how do you see your role and how do you support the chairman and your board in your position?
Yeah, it's kind of a redheaded stepchild position, right? Because you really don't have anything to do. But I do things. For some reason, I've become sort of the employee go-between. We've had a lot of turnover and a lot of I guess disagreements between employees over the last couple of years, and for some reason, I've become the sounding board for what would the board like to do about this. So, and I'm the one that stops in the office once a week and just says, "Hey, how's everybody going?" I don't tell them what to do, but I try to take a little temperature check of how they're getting along, and that includes talking to the NRSS people and the FSA people and say, how's it going over there? And then they'll tell me some scuttlebutt, and oh, so and so is mad at the other one. We don't do much about that, but that's nice to know. And sometimes that'll come up in the board meeting the next month. So that's just kind of a more of a self-imposed role here. But rotating board members, we just don't do that. When you become president and you're there until you retire is kind of the way it's gone. And we're lucky that we've had some very capable chairmen since I've only been on there a few years. Man, we've always had very good chairmen that one's a county commissioner now, and then David Hill is the other one, and he's doing a great job. And I'm actually on several boards where he's the chairman and I'm the vice chairman. So I'm always playing second fiddle to David Hill, which isn't a bad thing. One thing I'd like to see is meetings be quicker. When I am chairman of an organization, we'd have 20-minute meetings if we can do it at all, because most of the things we talk about during the reports are stuff that they could just give us a piece of paper and say, here it is. And most of the discussion that goes on doesn't really need to go on. It doesn't need to go on 4 times or 5 times and talk about things that are off the agenda. So it's kind of my pet peeve when a meeting goes too long. I like the way Mike's talking about shortening them up, and I hope to be a chairman someday when I grow up and work on that a little bit. Otherwise, roles, you know, I we kind of work together, David and I, on a couple things. If he's got an idea about specific employee stuff, because we've been dealing with that a lot, we bounce it off each other. But in a meeting, you know, I think I've run 2 or 3 meetings in the several years I've been there, so it hasn't been a big chore to be a vice chair. But I like to be involved, so.
Yeah, I like that. And I like how you mentioned a little bit as well as Mike did about engaging with employees and kind of being in the loop of what's going on. It's nice to at least be in the loop of understanding what is going on instead of being kind of blindsided one day of, maybe there's been 2 employees that have been going at it for months and you're like, what? I never even knew that I knew anything was going on. And so kind of being that sounding board is kind of nice to have that person. And I think too, as a chairman, you don't have to feel like you're alone, right? You have a board there to support you and a vice chair for a reason. So when you talk about kind of going back and forth or working with your chairman as a vice chair on, bouncing ideas off and coming up to some agreements, I think that's great, for the chairman to know that they are not alone. They have a sounding board, and to have ideas and things like that are a great support. So, yeah. Mike, did you have anything to add to?
Well, I know I'm very guilty of trying to just do everything myself. I don't know if that's from raising kids or what, but oftentimes when you ask someone to do something, if you really care about it, you're gonna double check, make sure they're doing it, make sure they did it right, make sure they did it the way you thought it should be done. And then pretty soon you figure out it would have been quicker to do it yourself. So that's a bad habit of mine. I'm trying to get better at that. To just put that in the hands of, let someone help and let them do it and don't worry about it unless they actually do fail. And then pick up the pieces. But I am guilty about trying to do too much or do it all myself when I have a full board that I should be involving in more.
Well, and I think too, like that whole delegating piece, it allows other board members to feel like they have a piece in the board as well. I think sometimes they don't do a whole lot, and so they do kind of feel like sometimes like, well, what am I really doing on here if I'm not, participating in these things or um, just attending a meeting. And so having them be a part of, maybe some of the decision making or delegating where, if as the chairman, maybe you're super busy and you get called about something and you're in the middle of something, be like, can you just call so and so? And I'm just busy right now. Would love to answer this, but can you call so and so and see if you can get some answers from someone else on the board? And if you still need me, reach out. And so just involving other board members, allowing them to have some of those decisions or responsibilities on the board too, so they feel accountable. I think that's great advice too. Anything else? Any other comments? See, Paula said in the chat, delegating also helps others learn the role so we can train our replacements as we want to or need to rotate off. Yes, it helps with that succession planning and helps them getting used to. So when Mike jumped into the role and he's like, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. If, maybe he were a little more involved, or maybe if you were a board member longer before he jumped into that role, he would have felt a little more comfortable and been like, oh yeah, kind of been there, done that a little bit different role, but that kind of might help your board members when they step into that role. Um, when we were talking about rotating, so yeah, we rotate every 2 years, every 1 to 3. So yeah, I think it just depends on the district. Every district's a little bit different, but yeah. Any other comments? or experiences?
Just one comment about working within the various roles. I think it's helpful to do some cross training or at least awareness. I know that some leaders get kind of protective about the roles that they have and they don't really want to share that with others. But I know there's been instances where leadership has maybe there's a family emergency or they've become ill, and all of a sudden, to Mike's point, you're in that leadership role that you've not been in, and then it's kind of an emergency situation. And so even just an awareness of what each role entails, what each person does, each board member's role, I think creates less of a crisis if there is indeed an emergency situation where they have to fill each other's positions or step in or step up.
Yeah, I love that. We don't always prepare for, right, the emergencies to happen. They just kind of happen without being prepared sometimes. And so taking time to prepare ahead of time can help in some of those crisis situations. And also when, especially with SCDs, if you get left without an employee, sometimes it's hard to be like, oh no, what are we gonna do? So
That's the
having that
worst.
of course. So being prepared and having that open conversation of, what do we do if so and so left or so and so was gone? Do we know what we're doing? And that can help you avoid that one day where you may have a 6 hour meeting because you're like, oh no, now we really gotta
Yeah,
fill in the pieces. Yeah.
that was a tough transition from
Mhm.
long-term employee going through no employee to new employee. It was, you know, it's interesting.
Yeah. And sometimes it's, yeah, we just sometimes don't even prepare for it. And sometimes one day they're there, the next day they're not, and you don't even get to even talk to them after that.
Because you think about, hiring an employee most of the time, outside of like an SCD, whether it's, a school or a elevator, whoever you're hiring usually has a pretty good working knowledge of what their position is going to be when they apply for it. Where with the SCD, all of our applications were brand new. They had no idea what the SCD was, what their job would be, they learned it all on the fly. So that, if we were looking at, well, I was a manager at the SCD in this county or this state, okay, you got a pretty good idea what your role is. But when you have to start from a clean slate, it really gets tricky.
The Employees Association has some pretty good bootstrap stuff to bring people on and teach them what to do and how to do their job.
Yeah, we utilize that stuff a lot, and it was really helpful.
And it can be very stressful on the supervisors, but it can also be a lot of anxiety on that new staff of like, maybe they're the only ones there and they're like, who am I supposed to ask these things to?
Yep.
And so, yeah, utilizing your resources, which can still be difficult when they're how many counties away and, they have to learn to pick up the phone and, maybe Zoom or do such and such to help. And I know we have some great employees that have reached out and utilized the resources and reached out to our team. And once you realize who your support is, I think they utilize everybody really well. So there is one comment. You've been creating a manager resource finder to help a replacement find things and know what needs to be done. Yeah, so already kind of working on that succession plan. If I get hit by a truck buck, yeah, that's a common way to call it. Yeah. So if something ever happened to you, what do you have already in place for the next person that comes in that can just help them kind of move things along really quickly? All right. Any other comments or last minute questions? I appreciate all the conversations and your experiences. I hope it'll be helpful for those that are just stepping into that role, or even if you've been on for a while, maybe it's just kind of nice to review and listen to how some other districts are doing things. Um, from our team, Leslie, Paula, Jody, any last minute comments to wrap up our session? And just a reminder, so good. All right. So we do have those in the Google Drive, the two resources. There's a new one that just came out that Leslie just shared about board burnout. So take a peek at that. And then the 4-H handbook is just a really good guide for those that are just stepping into that role and trying to define your roles and responsibilities. So thank you, Mike and Steve and Jody, for joining us as our panelists. And yeah, we will see you next time and have a great day.
All
Thanks
right,
for having
thanks.
us.